Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Zayin. Normally, a man gives money to a woman. He is the groom, she is the bride. Makes it very easy. Let's call them Avraham and Sarah, and it just goes. The money goes directly. That's a normal case. But now we're going to explore some interesting cases where there's a third party involved who is either receiving or giving that money. So Amar Rava, ten maneh lif loni ve'kadesh lecha. A woman, we're going to call her again Sarah, says to the groom, to Avraham, listen, don't give me the money, give it instead to my friend Reuven, not related, just the guy is there, and give it to him instead, and I will agree to be mikudeshet to you. The law is mikudeshet, midin arev. That works. And how do we know that works? Where is there a similar situation? That's that of a guarantor. How does a guarantor work? Arev lava fagav de lama tehan aliyadeh kameshabed nafsheh. If someone agrees to be a guarantor on a loan, he's telling the borrower, listen, if you can't pay, I will pay instead. So he's taking upon himself an obligation. He has a commitment, even though he receives no benefit. He didn't receive the loan. Normally, the guy who receives the loan, he has the money, so he has the obligation to pay. We see from an arev that it's possible to make a commitment even though you received no benefit. So that's a model. So too this woman, even though she received no benefit, the money didn't go to her, nevertheless, the money went to someone else, that's like the borrower, but she can commit herself and say, I am yours, I am prohibited to everybody else. She's happy that the money went to that Reuven. Maybe Reuven is down and out, a poor guy, and he says, give the money to him. I'm happy for that person to get it, and I will commit myself. Like a guarantor. A guarantor is my friend. I want my friend to get a loan. I'll guarantee his loan, and I like to see that. That's good for me, even though I'm not getting any money myself. I commit myself, and so therefore this works. Okay, second case. Now a case, the third guy, Reuven, the guy who was poor, we said before, let's say he's a good friend, and to Avraham. Maybe Avraham is poor, can't afford it. Reuven says, listen, I'm going to pay for Avraham. Here, Reuven says, here is money, aret mikudeshet, to Avraham with this money that I'm giving you. Reuven is giving Sarah the money on behalf of Avraham, not as a shaliach, but not as a shaliach was a different story. Here, he's just giving his own money. That works. Midin Eved Kena'ani. Where do we see a model that something like this can work? Eved Kena'ani, where you have an owner and someone wants to redeem the slave, right? A nice philanthropist comes and says, I want to redeem that slave, let him go free. I'm not buying him. And so he gives money to the owner, and thereby the Eved Kena'ani goes free. The Eved Kena'ani does not give anything or receive anything, but he receives his freedom, even though he didn't give any money. Eved Kena'ani, even though the Eved Kena'ani did not lose anything, he didn't give any money, and yet he can acquire his right, his freedom. So too Avraham, the groom, even though he didn't give any money, he didn't lose out anything, nevertheless he can acquire. In this case, Reuven is like the redeemer, Sarah would be like the owner of the slave, and the redeemer giving the owner of the slave, Reuven giving something to Sarah. And thereby Sarah says, okay, I will agree to give over my Kiddushin rights to Avraham. Avraham gains, even though he didn't pay. Good, that's scenario number 2. Scenario number 3, we're going to combine the different aspects of the first two. Ten maneh liploni ve'kadesh ani lo. A woman says to some other guy, Reuven, so in this case Sarah tells Reuven, give money to Avraham, and I will, through that money, agree to be mikudeshet to him. That works. Mikudeshet midin shenehem, because we're combining the law of Arev and the law of Eved Kena'ani. So this is a fantastic case. So you're lucky to be Avraham in this case. Avraham receives money, he gets the money, the Kiddushin money from Reuven, and he receives Sarah as a wife. He just sits there and he gets everything. So that's fantastic, but that works because you combine the aspects of both. And we're going to go through the exercise We'll try to combine one. We'll ask, wait, what about the other side? We'll bring that one. What about the other side? And the two together support each other as proof. Arev lav afagav de la mate hana'aliyade kameshabed nafshe. Arev teaches us the principle that even if a person doesn't get any benefit, still he can give his commitment. So here we apply the this woman, even though she didn't receive anything, but that's okay. She can give over her obligation, her commitment to the marriage, even without receiving anything. Now we ask, we only compared it to Arev so far. Midame Arev kanele kahaser mamona. In the case of Arev, the guarantor, he at least loses money. He pays, so at least he's involved somewhat. Whereas but in our case, Avraham, he gains acquisition of the woman, and he doesn't pay anybody anything. So it's really not quite the same as in Arev. So we answer, Eved Kenani yochiach dela kachaser mamona vekakane nafshe. Eved Kenani proves that someone can acquire even without giving anything. And so Avraham, why not? Why can't he acquire something? And he doesn't, even though he doesn't give anyone any money. So if you have, so that's the comparison. Now, if you had only Eved Kanani, we would say, Midame hatam hachteka makne kakane. In the case of Eved Kanani, the owner of the slave is the one who's receiving money, and he also gives over the ownership of the Eved Kanani back to himself. So he's both getting and giving. Fine, that's the same person. So he's doing both. That we understand. But in this case, the wife, she's giving her over herself. She's giving something, but she is not receiving anything. In the Kanani case, she received from a Reuven, so she received something. So Arev yochiach afagav delaka matehana aliyadeh meshabed nafshe. But that aspect can be proven that that's not important from the law of Arev, where even though he does not receive anything, still he can give himself over. He can give an obligation from himself. So when we combine the two together, that we get everything. So it's really fantastic. We're taking the first case where at least Avraham is involved in giving, although he doesn't give it to Sarah, he gives it to Reuven. That works. The second case is where Sarah at least receives something. She's not receiving it from Avraham, but she's rather receiving it from Reuven. In both of those cases, at least we have half of the normal formula. Normal formula is Avraham gives it to Sarah. So we saw Avraham giving it to Reuven. That's okay. Avraham is still giving something. Reuven giving it to Sarah. That's also okay. At least Sarah is getting something. Those two cases are equivalent to Arev and Eved Kanani respectively. The third case is Avraham is not giving anything. Sarah is not getting anything. Instead, Reuven is giving something to Avraham. And yet, even that works because you're just combining the basic principles of the first two cases. Rava taught the previous three cases and he had a solution, but now he gets one more variation and he doesn't know the answer. Ba'e Rava, helach maneh ve'ekadesh ani lecha mahu. If a woman says to a man, here is $100, she gives it to him, and I will be mikudeshet to you. So we had cases involving a third party where the Avraham is giving it to the third party, or the third party is giving it to Sarah, or the third party is giving it to Avraham. But here there's no third party. She is giving him the money. What about that case? Amar mozutra mishmed rapapa mikudeshet. So Rapapa says it's good. Amar le Rav Asher le mozutra imken havale nechasim sheyesh lahem acharayut niknim im nechasim she'en lahem acharayut. We're going to explain in a second how this could be, because Kiddushin doesn't he have to give something? She receives something. We saw some variations, but here it's completely opposite. So we're going to explain that in a second. But first, we're asking a related question, which is, if you permit this, then that would be an example of property that has that you can use as a guarantee. That applies to land. All right, land can serve as a guarantee for a loan. People are compared to land, so it's people and land. So if so, you're allowing people, in this case people, or land to be acquired together with property that does not have a guarantee, like just money or movable objects. Now, and that generally does not work, as we see here. We have the opposite in the Mishnah. Nechasim she'en lahem achrayut niknim im nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayut bekesef, bishtar ubehazaka. The usual case, the case that works is property that does not have cannot be used as a guarantee, like let's say animals or furniture, can be acquired together with land or other things that have a guarantee, if you use kesef, shtad, and chazaka. So here would be a typical example. I buy some land from you, and on the land is also some animals and some furniture. Now, how can you acquire land? Well, you can acquire land with money, with a contract, or hazaka, like closing the gate, doing something that shows ownership of the land. So in halacha, you can't just say orally, the land is mine, or the land is yours. You have to do something. So these three are acts that effectuate the acquisition. Now, even though I'm directly buying only the land, since these movable items are on the land, so I can say, oh, listen, while you're buying the land, also you want them buying the that animal and the car and whatever else, other movable objects that come, a kinyan agav it's called, right? As a by the way, this gets included, and so that kesef, shtad, or chazaka will acquire the movable object also. So that way works, because land, that's something more permanent, and that can bring along the things that are movable. That works, but the other way around does not work. We never see a precedent where you can acquire land or a person through, I sell you this mug, and say, listen, take this mug, right, pick it up, and then agav, you'll also acquire the land. That we never saw such an example. Now, in this case, it'll be like an example like that, because here the woman is giving over herself, all right? That's the Kiddushin. She's giving over to the man the right to marry her, and she's also giving $100. So the idea would be that he receives the $100, and through that monetary transaction, which is something that is not something that you don't use as a guarantee, agav, he also acquires the right to marry her, right? So this would be acquiring a person, or the right to marry a person, which is like land, through money, and that is the wrong way. We don't have a precedent for that. So how do you say mikudeshet? How does it work? Says, oh, did you think that she meant you will acquire me agav, the money? You acquire the money, right, as like normal in a normal way by taking the money, and then agav that together with that you acquire me. No, that's not what she meant. Rather, we're talking about a case where the man is a very important person, and because he's such an important person, for that kind of person to give that person a gift is a benefit to the giver, right? If I am allowed to go to the king, and I'm allowed to give the king a present, right? Give him some golden jewelry. The fact that the king allowed me in and accepted my gift, I'm the one that is honored by him. He doesn't need anything. He has everything, right? So the fact that he accepted my gift, that's a benefit to me. So here also we're talking about that this bride is marrying some prince, and for her to give $100 to this prince, and he accepts it from her, she actually gets benefit from that. This wouldn't work for just a regular person, where it's not a big deal. A regular person accepted my gift. But here, the act of giving is a benefit to her. So through that benefit, she can consent to giving over herself in marriage. So that's what it's talking about. That's how it works. It's not kinyan agav, and normally would not work if she gives money to the man. But if it's a situation like this where she gets benefit through the gift, then that is actually something that he, in a way, is giving to her. Good. Now, remember, Rava said all the three cases above. And so now we hear in the name of Rava that all of these possible types of transaction can work also not only Kiddushin, but also in a monetary thing. If I just want to buy some item, and instead of me paying, I'm going to tell you the third party will pay you. Right, or the third party will receive. So in any of the first three cases that we talked about, or maybe even indeed the last case, where you're giving something to an important person, but that act of giving is also receiving of benefit. So in all of these cases, usually a buyer gives money to the seller. But if the buyer would give money to a third party, or a third party give money to the buyer, or the buyer would give money to the seller would give money to the buyer, right? In all these cases, it would also effectuate the transaction. Why would someone do that? There could be lots of reasons, right? And listen, instead of paying me for this item that I'm selling, give the money to that person who's poor or whatever. And that I would like that. And I'll give over this vase that you're buying because you're giving money to that person. So again, just like with Kiddushin, and so too with any acquisition, you have to do an act. You can't just say I'm selling it to you. And that act, since you're giving the money, someone is giving the money to someone on behalf of so that the transaction will happen. That effectuates the transaction. So Rava says that. And now we say utzericha. It's important that Rava taught us this, that you can do these different unusual types of transaction, not only for Kiddushin, but also for monetary matters. We need to learn both. Yashminan Kiddushin mishum deha'itata nichala b'chol dehu k'diresh lakish tamaresh lakish tav lemetav tandul metav armelu alva mamona ema la. If you only said it regarding Kiddushin, I might think that this can work in Kiddushin. In Kiddushin, even if she's not receiving anything, for example, but she says, you know what, give it to Avraham. Or even if she gives something, or even if Reuben gives something to Avraham, and she's not the giver and she's not the receiver. In all these cases, we might say that it works for Kiddushin because this is a psychological rule. In general, a woman would be agreeable to be married with any form of benefit, even if it's an indirect benefit of hana'ah or whatever, because Resh Lakish says better for a woman to be together, for there to be two bodies, than to sit as a widow. Better for a woman socially, economically, certainly back then, to be married to someone in some way rather than to be alone is worse than anything. And therefore, she will agree to be married even if she's only receiving some indirect benefit. That's okay. But for a regular transaction, I might say, not true. A person selling something wouldn't necessarily want to give away that vase for some indirect benefit. Maybe have to do it more directly. So that's why he has to tell us that it works for monetary items. If he only said that you can do these types of three-way transactions regarding monetary matters, I might say it works there because regarding money, a person can always waive his right to something. All right, you owe me money? It's okay, I waive my right. Or I'm selling you an item. Listen, I waive the fee. You don't have to pay for it. You can always do that with money, but Kiddushin, you can't do that. If a woman says, the guy comes and says, I want to marry you, and she says, Haret Mekudeshet li, with this tabazo, she says, it's okay, keep it, I don't want it. Doesn't work. She can't just unilaterally give herself over in marriage, right? There has to be it has to be a monetary transaction of some sort in Kiddushin in order for it to be effectuated. Whereas money, it's really dependent on the person. So the person says, you don't owe me anything anymore. That's it. You don't owe anything. So I might think that it could only work for in monetary things, but because you can use this weird third-party thing because a person could just waive his right to it to begin with. So if you give the money instead to someone else, that's fine. But maybe Kiddushin, it wouldn't work. I might think Kiddushin, she actually has to receive something from him. And that's why Rava has to teach us regarding Kiddushin that it also works there. Good. Amar Rava. Rava is the hero of today. Hitkadeshi li lechatzihi mikudeshet. Chatziech mikudeshet li, and na mikudeshet. If a man says to a woman, you should be married to half of me, right? I'm only giving you half of my heart, half of myself. That works. But the other way around, if he says to her, half of you is mikudeshet to me. I'm only acquiring half of you. That's no good. Now we ask, Amale Abaye l'Rava, Mai shena chetzech mikudeshet li de'ena mikudeshet, Isha amar Rachamana, velo hasi Isha. Hachi nameh, Ish amar Rachamana, velo hasi Ish. The pasuk says, Ki kach Ish Isha. So Abaye asks Rava, what's the difference between the two? How come when he says, half of you is married to me, it's no good? Well, maybe because it's ki kach ish isha. A man has to acquire a woman. A woman means a whole woman, not half a woman. So that's why it doesn't work. But I should apply the same thing. If that's your derivation from a pasuk, this says ki kach ish. So you should say a whole man has to marry a woman, not half a man. So why are you making a distinction between these two formulas? Amale hachi hashta. Rava says to Abaye, wait, you can't compare them. I'm not just learning it from the word, the fact that it means a person and not half a person. Think about it conceptually. Rava was the great conceptualizer among the Amoraim. Hatam iteta lebetere lahazya ela gavra mila hazi lebetere v'chi kamar la de'i ba'ina leminsav achariti nasebna. In that case, a woman is not eligible to marry two men. So by saying that half of you is married to me, if a man tells a woman that, then he's saying, okay, I'm only going to take half of you, but the other half of you can go marry someone else. But that doesn't work. A woman cannot be married to two men or more. So that's why it doesn't work. But can a man not be married to two women? He can. So therefore, what he's saying, and it's not literally my right half or my left half or top half. It doesn't mean that. It means that if I say half of me is married to you, if the man says that, what he means is that I'm marrying you, but I'm reserving the right to marry someone else. I reserve the right to take a second wife. Since that is possible, therefore that formula makes sense, and there is Kiddushin. But it's impossible for a woman to be married to two men. Therefore, if he says, half of you is married to me, then it's invalid totally. They are not. There is no Kiddushin there at all. Good. Amar le'mor zutra b'red Rav Mari l'Ravina v'nifshetu la kiddushe bechula. So now Mozutra, the son of Rav Mari, asks Ravina, why doesn't the betrothal spread throughout her body, right? Even though he said, half of you is married to me, and she can't marry anybody else. Nevertheless, we should say, since she can't marry anybody else, so it doesn't make sense, so let the Kiddushin be valid and apply to all of her, meaning that this Kiddushin is valid, she's Mikudeshet to him, and she still can't marry anybody else, right? But why not say it spreads to all of herself, all of her body? And we have an example of this. Mila Tanya, Haomed ragla shel zo ola tehekula ola. We learned in a Braita that if someone goes to an animal and declares, right, the leg of this animal, I am taking upon myself to be in olah. So does that mean only the leg is in olah? Can you cut off just that and serve it? No, it doesn't work. But the formula does work, and it spreads throughout the whole thing. Once you make a one leg olah, the whole animal becomes an olah, because no such thing as half an olah animal. So we should say the same thing here. That it will spread throughout the entire woman, and it should be a valid kiddushin. And we further add to the question, there is another opinion over there that say, if I just say the leg is an olah, it does not spread to the whole thing. There is that other opinion, but even that other opinion, he only limits that disagreement, the other opinion, to a case where I say the leg or any other part of the animal that is not life dependent, right? If you cut off the leg, it could still live. If you cut off its tail, it could still live. That's when it doesn't spread. But if I take, let's say, the head, and I say the head of this animal is an olah, well, an animal can't live without its head, and therefore it does spread. And so that would apply also to a woman. Half a woman cannot survive. Half a person is not viable. Therefore, we should apply the same principle here and say if a man is mekadesh, half a woman, then it should spread to all of her, and it should be a valid kiddushin. All right, but then we challenge this. No, it's different. Over there, it's talking about an animal which has no intellectual capacity and has no will. So therefore, if I say the head of this animal is holy, so then it goes to the whole thing. But here, we're talking about a person with their own mind, and they have to have agreement to it. And so if he only says, half of you is mikudeshet, So who says that she wants her other half to be mikudeshet? We cannot assume that, so that you can't apply the precedent of the animal to a person. Rather, but it is similar to the following case. Kiddushin is similar to the following case. If you have an animal that's owned in partnership with two people, one of the partners makes his half hekdesh. The other person doesn't. So now you have an animal that's half hekdesh. But then the partner that made it hekdesh went and bought the other half of the animal from his partner. So now he's the sole owner, and now he makes it hekdesh again, making the other half hekdesh. Does it work? Yes, the entire animal is hekdesh, even though you cannot sacrifice it. Well, why can't you sacrifice it? Because at the time that he made it hekdesh the first time, only half of it was hekdesh. And that's not good. You can't sacrifice half an animal. So at that point, it's called nidche. It is disqualified from being a sacrificial animal. There's a rule, we're going to see it in a second, that once an animal is disqualified from being sacrificed, at one point, it becomes disqualified forever. Even if you rectify the thing that disqualified it, and you're able to fix that, still it will not become sacrificable ever again. And that's the case here, since at the time that he made it hekdesh first, it was only half hekdesh, and that's not sacrificable. So even though later he fixes it, it's still because it is holy. The whole thing is holy, but you actually offer it as a sacrifice. Furthermore, because it is a full sacrificial animal, you can make a substitute. I mean, if you say, I want the second I take another animal just from the flock that's not sacred, and I say I want this to be a substitute for the one that was half. The substitution does work in the sense that the second animal becomes also holy, becomes kadosh, but even that second animal has the same law as the first, that it cannot be sacrificed. In other words, the dichui, the disqualification applies to the second animal as well. Now, this case is more similar to the case of Kiddushin, because here, at first, when it was owned by two people, so the two owners have their own minds, just like a woman has her own mind. And so when the one owner says, this is hekdesh, that does take effect to the half, but does not spread to the other half, because while the other owner owns that other half, it doesn't spread. If it would spread from one half to the other, even when there's two owners, then actually the hekdesh would be totally valid and it would be sacrificable, because what's wrong with it, right? The hekdesh spread to the whole thing, and so the whole thing is hekdesh, the whole thing can be sacrificed. But that's not the halacha. Halacha is that when there is another owner involved, and that other owner has his own mind, and has to decide himself if he wants to be included in this hekdesh or not, so then the hekdesh does not spread. In this case, has the added complication that then he buys it and makes it hekdesh after, but that's still no good. So back to the Kiddushin case, when the man says, half of you is mikudesh to me, so that half is mikudesh. Well, if you can say that half is mikudesh, it still won't spread to the rest of her, because she is the owner of her other half. And so we cannot presume that she gave over her other half as well automatically. And that's why it does not work. And since you can't be half mikudeshet, because you can't marry a woman, you can't marry two men, so therefore we say the formula is not valid. Okay, and follow up to this case about the animal owned by two people, we can learn from this three laws. Shema mina telat. Shema mina bale hayim nitchim. We can learn that the principle of something that becomes disqualified becomes permanently disqualified. We knew that was true for an animal that has already died. If you slaughter an animal and it becomes disqualified somewhere in the process of sacrificing it, then it becomes permanently disqualified, even if you fix it. That we knew. Now we learned something else, that even while the animal is alive and it becomes disqualified for some reason, it's permanently disqualified. Second thing we learned, that a deferral from the outset is a deferral. What this means is that if we might have thought that an animal can become permanently disqualified only if it's a valid sacrifice, right? When some animal becomes a valid sacrifice and then something wrong happens, that's called a permanent deferral. But if it was never valid as a sacrifice to begin with, and it has a disqualification, maybe that disqualification is temporary, and then once it becomes sacrificable, then it can renew. So we learn from here that even though this animal was never sacrificable, because it was only half of it was hekdesh, that it can already be permanently disqualified, even when it did not yet become have an ability to be sacrificed. Because otherwise, I would say, all right, it became disqualified, but it couldn't be sacrificed yet. And now, if I go make ekdesh the other half, so maybe that disqualification can leave because it's not permanent. And then only after that, it will become sacrificable. But the fact that we don't say that shows that a disqualification, even before it's sacrificable, is a permanent disqualification. And third, we also learned that a permanent disqualification applies even to the monetary value of something. And in this case, that would be the other half of it that was owned by the second partner who did not make it hekdesh, and so it is disqualified, even though it's only the monetary value. The disqualification applies only to the monetary value, since that half of it was not yet made hekdesh. It's only that it was owned because it was owned by somebody else, and it was not made hekdesh, and the animal became disqualified, even though it only applies to the monetary value of the other half. And nevertheless, it does apply, and the whole animal is permanently disqualified. Next, Rava asks a series of questions based on what we just learned. Ba'ai Rava. Mahu. A husband says, half of you is mikudesha to me with half a peruta, and the other half of you also with another half of a peruta. Is that valid? I mean, altogether, it makes a whole person and a whole peruta. Whole person is, you need a whole person, and one peruta is the minimum. So here's the two sides. Once he says, that's one sentence, and he divides that sentence from the next one. These are two separate statements, two separate ceremonies, and each one by itself is invalid, because you can't do Kiddushin with half a peruta, and you also can't do Kiddushin with half a person. So nothing is good. Or Dilma Moneh v'holechu, or is he going and counting up? It's all part of one statement and one ceremony, and he's like, grocery list, I want this and that, and he's adding all that together. So he says half for one half a peruta, the other half for another half a peruta. All together, it's good, and that will be valid. And if you say, yes, these are all two parts of one ceremony, and that he's counting up, what if he says half of you for an entire peruta, and half of you for another entire peruta, which seems to be better because he's giving a whole peruta. On the other hand, since a whole peruta is a valid amount, maybe he means to separate the two statements. On the one hand, maybe he said, once he says half you for a peruta, he thinks that he thinks it's a whole peruta, so that is a valid transaction in and of itself, to take half of her, and he's making another transaction, the other half for a peruta. But each transaction by itself is no good, because even though peruta, it passes the minimum, a half a person is not valid. Or do we say, as long as it's within the same day, he's continuing on and counting. Right, in the morning, he's saying, okay, I'm going to acquire half of you for a peruta, and then in the afternoon, he can say, and the other half for another peruta, and we consider all of that to be two parts of one ceremony, and they would be valid in that case. And if you say anything within the same day, we can say is part of the same ceremony, we add it all together. If he says, here, half of you will be mikudeshet to me today with one peruta, and the other half tomorrow with a different peruta. Since we said tomorrow, does the next day make it a separate divide into a separate ceremony? Or is he saying, I want this to be one long ceremony, right? Maybe you want a very long wedding that spans 2 days. I'm going to start today and I'm going to finish tomorrow, but it's all part of one ceremony, add it all together, and it's valid. Further, I'm acquiring both two halves of you with one peruta. So here do we say, okay, for sure this is okay, because he's saying it in one statement, so it's one transaction, so it's valid. Or do we say a woman cannot be betrothed in halves at all? Even if you're buying the whole thing, you can't do it in two halves, right? We only sell whole items. If you can't go into a car dealer, say I want to buy half a car. Can't buy half a car. Says, okay, I want to buy half of the front half of this car, and I also want to buy the back half of the same car. How are they going to write that up, right? They don't have a form to buy half a car. Even if you agree to buy both halves of the car, right? It may be impossible to do it, and in case of Kiddushin, right, it doesn't make sense. It's against the whole concept of Kiddushin to cut a woman in half at all, because she can't be married to two men, and therefore even saying this formula, even though you're acquiring both halves in one ceremony at one statement, still maybe it's no good. So these questions we leave open for discussion. Interesting case. There's a father that has two sons, and there's a father that has two daughters, and so they want to join together, both marry off one son to one daughter, and his brother to the other, the bride's sister. So the father of the groom says, here is one peruta, and with this peruta, I want both of your daughters to be married to both, each to each of my sons. Is that valid? Do we go with the giver and the receiver? And here, you need one peruta for each giver and receiver. And if there's only one giver and one receiver, even though they're making a transaction for two couples, still it's only one giving. So therefore one peruta works. Do we focus on the person giving and receiving? Person giving and receiving doesn't always have to be the bride and the groom. If the girls are minors, then the father can receive the money on their behalf. A father can also give his son over as a minor into to Kiddushin. So let's say they're all minors, and the father's sitting around. Say, I like your daughter, I like your sons, and let's make a deal. A 2-for-1 special. So does that work? Because the giver and receiver is receiving a peruta, or do we say no? It goes by the brides and grooms. Each couple needs their own peruta. So we have to give at least 2 perutot. Good question. Teko. Papa. Bitecha ufaratecha bifruta. Mahu. Man says, I want to acquire your daughter and your cow with one peruta. All right, very nice. 2-for-1 special deal. What about that? Mi amrinan bitecha b'chasi peruta uparatcha b'chasi peruta. Does he mean by that I want that half of this peruta will be for your daughter and half the peruta will be for your cow? In which case, it will not be effective, because you cannot acquire a woman with a half a peruta. Or did he mean to say, listen, I want to acquire these two things from you, and independent of the money, right? You also need an act to do the acquisition. And so what he means to say is that here I'm going to give you a peruta. The peruta will be solely for acquiring the woman, because that's how he's not doing shtar or bi'ah. So he's going to use kiddushay kesef. So you need a whole peruta. That's how he's acquiring the daughter for a wife, as a wife, and the cow, the cow is going to make the transaction by pulling the cow, and he's not going to use the money at all, even though he gave a peruta. He says bitecha ufaratcha befruta. Still, he meant that the peruta will be to acquire the daughter as a wife, and the para will be done by in a different way as meshicha. Teko, we did leave that also standing. By Rav Asher, we're going by generations. Rava, 4th generation. Rav Papa, 5th generation. Rav Asher, 6th generation. Each one adds more questions to the one before. Bitecha v'karka'acha bifruta. A man says to another guy, I want to acquire your your daughter and your field with one peruta. Mahu bitecha b'chasi peruta v'karka'acha b'chasi peruta. Does he mean that he wants both of the transactions to be effectuated through this peruta, half for the wife, half for the land? In that case, it would not work. The Kiddushin would not work. Can't do Kiddushin with half a peruta. Or does he mean, I want to acquire your daughter as a wife with the whole peruta, and I also want to acquire your land. But the land, I'll take possession of that by closing the gate, doing some work on the land, a form of chazakah. And in that case, both transactions would be valid. Teko, we leave that standing, so we have a lot to think about. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.